Hello, welcome to another episode of EPMS Tech Talk. I'm Chris Costa.
And I'm Joanne LaFlamme.
So Joanne, what should we cover tonight?
Well, I thought maybe we could talk about AR invoices that might have a credit balance, how they get that way, what do you do, how do you handle them?
Sure.
Okay.
All right, well, let's take the first question first, how they could get that way. And there's a couple reasons, and the primary one would be, if a customer sends in an overpayment and they direct the payment specifically to an invoice, some people do elect to force that payment all onto that invoice and just let that invoice reflect the credit balance because that's what the customer indicated.
Okay, makes sense.
So the invoice would reflect the credit balance, and it would be just like any other credit in the system.
Okay,
So it'll show up on the aging report as a credit balance. It'll show in the inquiry as a credit balance.
all right,
And then you're right, there are different things that we can do to kind of correct that or deal with that. Is
Okay.
maybe a better way going forward. Okay.
all right, great.
Okay.
So maybe we could take a look at that.
Sure. Yeah. Let me show you first. Let me come into the system here. Let me show you. If I go to a customer, and let me drill into their transaction. So here's one here that you can see has an initial value of $106 roughly, and because of a $200 payment that was directed to this invoice, it's showing a $93 credit balance. So we could do a couple of things, and it kind of depends on either what the customer wants or how you want to handle it. But if the customer wants, if they didn't mean to send it all on that invoice and they want their money back, you can do an adjustment to this invoice and then refund them the money.
Okay,
Or you could leave it on the balance here until there's another invoice, and then issue a debit against this and then a credit against the invoice that comes later. Kind of use it as maybe a prepayment on an invoice that's going to come later.
okay.
Okay.
So can we take a look at how you'd handle it if you wanted to refund the customer?
Sure. Okay.
Okay.
So going through that step, so if I've got now typically if you've got a credit balance, obviously the offset would be using a debit journal. So if I come out of here and if I open up a debit journal, I can call up the customer. Whoops. Count 1,000. And let's say, I think it's 93.50. Okay.
You get $9.50 there.
Oh, 93.50. And I would have to, of course, select my GL account that I want to adjust back. Now, if I'm refunding, this is going to be a two-step process. We'd not only adjust the invoice here, but we would then likely turn around an AP and issue a check.
A check, right.
So whatever GL code we put in here would be the same that we would use in AP.
So it goes in and out.
Exactly.
Okay,
Okay.
that makes sense.
So for now, I'll just pick anything in there, and then when we add here, we can of course select the invoice. Okay, so I would select the credit balance invoice, and one of the big things to keep in mind here, when you apply the debit journal to this credit balance invoice, you want to make sure that you type in the amount to allocate as the absolute value.
Okay,
Some people tend to overthink it a little bit because the open balance is negative. They think they need to apply a negative balance here. You want to make sure this is set to the absolute value.
okay, makes
Okay.
sense.
Okay. So I could record this debit adjustment, save it, post it like I normally would, then go
And
into
then
AP
Okay.
and record the payment to record the check.
Now, what if I had, so I've got this $93.50 credit on this invoice. What if I've got another invoice with a positive balance and I want to take that credit from one invoice and apply it to another?
Sure. Okay. So why don't I cancel this and we'll shift gears a little bit. And let's go back to that customer for a second. So I do have two invoices here. Okay, I've got one with a traditional open balance and then one that of course has that still credit balance. So if we wanted to transfer or offset both of them, now I can't just do one transaction and apply the invoice to yet another invoice.
Okay,
So what we would have to do is adjust both.
okay,
So you could do a debit journal again to the credit balance invoice and a corresponding credit journal to the other invoice that's existing with the traditional balance.
okay. Well, that makes sense.
Okay, and people ask that question all the time. Can I just take this invoice, do sort of an apply open and point it to another invoice. Well, you can't do that because it's the same transaction.
Mm-hmm.
You can't just apply an invoice to another invoice.
Okay.
So basically adjust them both. Okay.
Okay. If I had done done a credit journal to it, or a debit journal to it, then I could create a credit that I leave open for the next invoice as well, right?
Correct, exactly.
Okay, great.
Yep. And I suppose it could come up that it was just a flat out mistake and you just want to write that off.
Mm-hmm.
And at which point a debit journal, again, to just write off the balance and raise that invoice back to zero. would
Okay.
work also.
Great. Well, thank you.
So, okay, sure thing. Any other questions?
Nope, I think you've answered everything. Thank you.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for watching. This was another episode of EPMS Tech Talk. I'm Chris Costa.
And I'm Joanne LaFlamme.
Please look forward for more to come.